So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday afternoon. So, the Impacts, along with the ISC Wellness Center, we have organized this mini workshop on grief and trauma. So, as we all know, thanks to the pandemic, we have all been going through many things, grief and trauma being the chief of them. And these grief and trauma seem to be quite complicated and multi-layered than we typically tend to think of them. Be it loss of job, relationships, uncertainty about the future, losing sense of security, and so on and so on. So, because of this, we thought it'd be quite apt to discuss these things. So, welcome to the workshop, Navigating Through Grief and Trauma. My name is Deep. I am from Empaths, student support, peer support group here on the campus. So, I think we'll just head off to the first session, which we have about understanding grief by Dr. Shoma Chakravarti. So, Dr. Shoma Chakravarti holds a master's in psychology from Sampurna Montfort College in Bangalore and a PhD in applied psychology from Pondicherry University. Her doctoral work focused on cancer caregiving. She has served as a postgraduate teaching faculty in Mount Carmel College, Bangalore, St. Francis College for Women in Hyderabad, and most recently, Nanavati Women's College in Bombay. She has several publications in the areas of health and coping from different lenses like caregiving, gender, as well as trauma. She's a certified counselor and takes a special interest in working with clients navigating through loss. She has completed the level 1 training in trauma therapy from TISS. She writes about mental health from her own perspective as a human first therapist later on an Instagram page, Izaka_mental health. So over to you, Dr. Shoma.
I'm audible, right?
Yeah.
Right. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, to the IISC as well as the empaths and the people organizing this deep, especially who constantly been in touch trying to make this usable and digestible for the audience. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak about something like this that we usually don't speak of. And before I begin, first of all, also welcome to everybody on a Saturday afternoon to come in for a talk like this is actually commendable. I begin with a couple of disclaimers. The first, that I'm not making an assumption at all that there's somebody in this room who's not had a close interaction with grief at any point recently. By which I mean, if you've gone through a loss, it could be anything, a person, a relationship, and possibility, an opportunity. Some parts of this presentation may feel a little heavy or not so pleasant. In that case, I would just tell you to do what you need. If you need to breathe, if you need to drink water, if you need to move a bit and come back, it's completely fine to do that. The second thing is, nevertheless, I'd also encourage everyone to try and go through whatever is being presented with reference to something that they felt as loss. Again, it doesn't have to be a death. If that feels very big, you can take something that, like you had a lost opportunity or a broken relationship, just to apply it and see how this feels. So we'll begin. Deep, can you project the slides?
Yeah, just a second. You can see it, right?
Yeah, you need to scroll back up.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Right. So because I take personal interest in this area, I just want to first of all say that grief is like this staircase. So it can be that you feel like you're almost at the top and things are feeling completely fine, but a day, an anniversary of a loss, a reminder, a failure, or a problem, or a stressor in any other part of life will have you coming back the steps in this same way. But having said that, we are all equipped as human beings. We are equipped to understand and deal with grief only if we give it the conditions it needs, and that's what most of this presentation will be about. Next slide, please. Right. So I thought of this session as a place where we can converse and reflect. Even if you can't converse directly with me, if you use the chat option, it will be great if you share anything that comes to your mind. If you don't feel like sharing, even just applying the questions to you is great. So the first thing is we're going to look at what is this weird feeling that we've been having. So literally noticing and naming how this languishing, this sense of grief or trauma, whatever you want to call it, is showing up in your system. It's not going to show up with a label of grief. It's going to show up like when you're not feeling motivated to work, you're feeling tired after a whole night's sleep, This has not happened on this scale in most of our lifetimes, as far as I can guess. So, first of all, to understand what's happening and give it a name, because naming makes it less powerful or more handleable for us. The second thing is really experiencing or embodying it. Because of the kind of demographic we're looking at, all of you are mostly researchers and generally thinkers, we can think through our grief and feel like we are coping with it, which is that, that made sense, it had to happen, this person was old, or this job opportunity is gone, another one will come, I don't need to feel bad, I have so much going right. We are so rooted in the front brain that thinking about and thinking through painful feelings has become the norm. But our body doesn't work that way. The body works bottom up. It picks up how it's feeling from experiences in the body, and then when you try to impose that cognitive framework onto what you're feeling, it's not going to help, because the body will feel the suppression of emotion. So we look at how we can actually look at and feel grief the way we need to. We'll also look at what we need to do to care for ourselves. I don't think collective grief has ever been this present. So we'll look at how do you care for yourself, and through that, how do you know what to do for other people around you who may be experiencing mental health challenges because of just the time that we are finding ourselves in. Next slide. I picked this up from a Harvard Business Review article or a McKinsey article, which spoke about how on the right are certain fundamental needs we all have to live and function, and how it's starting to change with the pandemic. It started in the beginning when we realized that, you didn't have to be at the workplace, or you didn't have to, the work you were doing automatically started feeling a little meaningless or difficult, or you felt like you could just give it up, right? That somewhere may align with loss of structure. We didn't know what we were doing with our jobs last year, or the sense of, promotions, opportunities you had at work. I have a client who was supposed to go to another country to present a paper, and she was looking at that being the landmark end of her law degree, and she wasn't able to do that because of what happened with the pandemic last year. All of these are actually losses, because there was an expected trip, an event, an expectation, a success that she was intending to have, which was taken away very abruptly. Now, just with reference to last year, I don't know if you even take a minute to just look through these, some or the others will resonate with all of us. Loss of territory, if I don't go to the workplace and I'm working from home, what is happening? Home is now lost because home has been overtaken by work. Loss of structure, some of us are working all day long, we don't have a boundary, we don't know where we are, when our workday closes. These are not ways in which we were meant to live, but because of the pandemic, this has happened, and this is what's given rise to this feeling of languishing. 2 months back, there was an article on languishing, which I'm sure many of you saw. It was doing the rounds, it was being shared very, very widely. Languishing is essentially that feeling of the opposite of well-being, saying what I'm doing is not making sense, people around me are not okay, my existing ways of supporting myself or drawing support from others aren't working. So the first activity that I had planned, can you move to the next slide, Deep? Was to just name the loss for yourself. So if you imagine yourself in Feb of last year when things were fine, and as you move through what has been happening and the second wave, etc., even if you've not lost a person, what other losses over here can you identify with? How have you been experiencing them as well? If you can just think for yourself, take a minute or two, and if you want to write it down, allow it to sink in, it would be great. You can also share it on chat if you'd like to. Anyone? So there has been a lot of loss of control, the kind of ways in which we had access to helping people, supporting people, taking care of our loved ones. You assume when you go to a hospital, you'll get a bed. Today, that's not true. Tanuj said loss of entertainment. Yes, I don't remember the last time anybody went to a multiplex. Pankti says loss of predictability. loss of daily motivation to perform optimally. Yes, hundreds of people saying when they wake up in the morning, they are not any more restored than when they went to bed, and they don't have the energy for the day to come. Loss of independence. Any others? Loss of predictability. Loss of a future, loss of an envisioned future. Yeah. A lot of people are talking of this in the way when they say, I'm not making plans anymore. They're just telling you, I'm not going to plan anything. Right? Someone says loss of relationships, all of the above, right? Loss of a relationship. Now, these are not very benign or neutral things. We have something called an assumptive world, which tells you that you are worthy, life is meaningful, and things will continue as is. When the pandemic happened, it kind of split open our assumptive world, because shaking hands with somebody, hugging somebody is now could be like your fatal error, literally, right? So these actually, if you look at whatever you're naming, and everyone is experiencing these, I don't want to kid anybody by saying, oh, you know what, it's not happening to us, or it's not happening to teachers or therapists or anybody. This is pervasive now, and all of these actually build into the same feelings of grief or depressive symptoms that we speak about. Because I'll just show you on the next slide. Deep, can we move to the next slide? Because in Feb last year, we were at this river of life. This is a very, very commonly used metaphor to talk about grief and loss. So one day you're like just going through life in the way you always have. Literally, this is what makes us live. The assumptive world tells us that tomorrow when you wake up, things are going to be fine. You're going to continue to do what you're doing. People you count on, opportunities you were looking for will stay the same. And then at some point, there is a dip or a fall. You can fall at different pace, but it is still a fall. It is still a fracturing of the assumptive world. And everybody is currently in this time where they are sort of, floating through what they have been perceiving as loss and ending up with different experiences. Whether that is a feeling of, there's nothing right, which is the immediate feeling we have when we lose something. Some of us have processed some losses, so we may be at restoration, where we are looking at, okay, this part of my life is still okay. Some of us may really be hurting. Also, to remember that this is not a linear movement. You're not going from, once you've had a loss, you're just moving outwards and things are going to be fine. Like I said, this is a very, very sort of recursive course. It will keep going back on and back up. Next slide, please. Now, when our assumptive world is broken like that, we experience losses. Loss is anything precious being taken away from you. It can be a person, entity, idea, dream, anything. Now, some important technicalities about loss. Generally, losses that we can see are tangible. So someone loses a job, it's a tangible loss. They're not going to their workplace anymore, the salary, etc. has stopped. All losses are accompanied by multiple secondary losses. So even the lockdown itself, like all the things we listed, are actually secondary losses to the lockdown, because they're happening in effect or in sort of attendant to the overall loss that's happened. Lots of losses are intangible. So imagine someone who's actually experienced a breakup at this point. They are not able to meet their friends. They are not able to meet other people who would have otherwise witnessed their pain and given them some sort of support, some conversation, some ways to really hold them at that time. Now that's not really available. There are also non-finite losses, which can be like a grain of sand stuck in your eye, which means that there is something which is simultaneously a loss and not, and that ambiguity of it can be extremely difficult. So how do you know something's okay or not? Literally in the pandemic, when we are looking at how things are, and when you look to the future, it looks simultaneously that you can hope for things to get better, but one day the news shows up something else about another wave and we are rolling back. So it's simultaneously existing in a space where some problematic things are just happening to us and we are living with it constantly. And estrangement in a relationship, a very difficult relationship with a family member, can be an example of a non-finite loss. It's also important to remember that some of us have already had stressful life experiences, and so a new loss triggers all the previous, and we can actually be experiencing chronic sorrow, which will show up in, again, languishing, feeling tired, feeling listless, feeling like life is not so great in the first place. I titled these as living losses because we are continuing to function with these losses. So it's like, if you want to just put an analogy from the body, if you have a broken ankle and you're running still, living in the pandemic has become like that. We can move to the next slide. Now, loss will give rise to two processes. Loss is not pathological or illness as such on its own, but it can become so. What determines that is how we are being supported, witnessed, connecting, expressing, and how actually life itself will give you these options or these phrases where we grieve a lot and then we look at what's fine. So immediately when something devastating happens, people tell themselves sometimes, this will not be the end of me, or you know what, something is still fine in my life, or I have to look at keeping myself together for something. Whatever be the reason, people are going to constantly fluctuate between the loss and the restoration, and this is in the nature of the experience. So when I find myself thinking of, say, loss in a certain way, I may feel like I think of the last time things were okay. I may be cooking something that somebody, I have lost liked, and suddenly there can be an intrusion of grief. There can be feelings of you will find yourself flitting back and forth, and there will be avoidance. So we don't want to label or stigmatize any response to grief, but not all people who are grieving a relationship, anything, are going to be looking sad. They can go and immerse themselves at work. They can go and start socializing, shopping. They can go and start really sort of, binge watching television, binge eating, whatever be these. It is really the organism's response to dealing with the sheer amount of arousal that's coming up in a system. So normally we would have a tendency to attach a negative valence to this, saying, this is denial, this is not good, this person is not getting it. But we don't want to stigmatize that, because grief is not a thing that happens to you every other day, and your system is not equipped to handle it. So even in the pandemic, if you find yourself feeling like, I started a TV show last week and I watched all 10 seasons and I'm not feeling like working, we're avoiding certain feelings there. It's sort of a refuge space at that point. It's okay in the short run. Maybe if we continue to do that the whole time, it's not going to be helpful. On the other side, you can also identify restoration. So we are still making plans. All of you who are into academics are still working towards your dissertations, your thesis, data, etc., etc. Because we are still functioning. We are attending to what life needs us to do. We may also be learning new things. You may be signing up for new courses. You may be signing up for new opportunities. We are still, there's a part of us which is planning, and that's also like the yin and the yang. So in all of this hopelessness, there will still be some hope, and we need to be able to fluidly move through that. There may also be distraction. Now, distraction, whether you choose it or whether you have friends to help you, is a good thing with grief sometimes, because people don't give themselves permission to grieve. So it may feel like if I go out and I distract myself, I go out for a meal, I go to a party, it looks like I've stopped grieving, I've stopped being sad. And sometimes we don't want to give ourselves that permission. But you you're not really helping yourself grieve by sitting with the grief the whole time as well. Some people can be very possessive about their grief and want to really allow themselves to just sort of sink into it. Again, it's okay, but in the long run, you will have to start moving and doing new things. And there are, of course, new roles, identities, relationships that we are constantly looking forward to. Now, in normal times, this loss and restoration will happen over months, years. You may find yourself flitting back and forth. But there is an important thing here. Generally, our everyday life experience becomes like a addition. So if your everyday life experiences currently are not like any other time before, so daily life is taking more effort, our bandwidths are reduced, and so grief reactions are getting more and more complex in the current times. We are seeing extremely high rises in cases of anxiety, depression, generally subclinical, any illness at a subclinical level is on the rise. We are also seeing changes in our bodies, which of course have an implication on the changes in our mind. And it's also about giving ourselves time to grieve then, because everyday life experience is taking up so much, means we need to cut back. And that's what we can do for languishing. We can revise our expectations, not expect ourselves to function at 120, not expect yourself to function at your pre-pandemic levels of productivity. It needs a revisioning of how we see ourselves as holders of our experience, not just doers of our tasks. So yeah, next slide, please. So I was asked to keep this relatable, and I had put in a couple of case profiles. Maybe we can just work with one. Just if you even read this person's journey, I call it a journey because grief is not a 6-session thing where you come to therapy for 6 sessions and you get better. I want to also point out that this is not one person, this is an amalgamation of multiple people's experiences. Just to read this, and first of all to put yourself there and think of what this person needs. If you can just type out what you think this person needs in the chat box. If you just put yourself in her place, the need to not feel alone, absolutely, there's nobody witnessing her at this point. What else? Loss of connections in general, not just romantic. Exactly. It's also about where she is in life. Like, she was about to graduate from law school, which is like very, very prestigious to her. It's a lot of her own effort that's gone in. She's not getting to have her convocation. These are very important rites of passage. Trying to brave the storm, but I think she's mentally exhausted. Lost sense of normalcy, disconnection and numbness. If you could think of one thing this person needs to hear, what is it? What do we typically tell people who are struggling? That it's okay to feel like this. Right. How many times have you heard that being said to you, though? Right. All right. Fine. Essentially, this is all that we need when we see somebody who's dealing with any sort of loss or anything that's emotionally challenging, right? We need to see where they are at, meet them where they're at. So we can also go in and saying, be strong, things are going to get better, it can only get better from here, etc. But remember that maybe that's not what the person wants. You also, possibly a sensitive person, may take all of that to heart and feel like something's not okay with her. She doesn't really need to hear that anymore. So multiple losses, yeah, like everybody said, loss of a relationship, loss of all connections, loss of normalcy, loss of a lot of endings, because I know some part of this person, from the one that I know, there has been a lot of milestones which have sort of gone down the drain, and she was working towards it. There is also a lot of, like, you can see what a relationship means to somebody versus what a relationship means to somebody who comes from a home where there has already been one major relationship loss. Her home does not feel the same. She already has a non-finite loss there. So the new loss may really take her down. Even when she's really struggling, like she's not able to eat, sleep, etc., there is no one she feels who even has awareness of that. And so she's very, very isolated. Yes, she's very isolated in her loss. Can we move to the 2 slides down? I don't think we'll have time for the next one. We can just move to the next to next. The next one. Yeah. So foundational research on grief. No, the previous one. Yeah, just here. Right. Foundational research done on dying and grieving itself. Deep, the previous one. Yeah, just this one. Right. There was a lot of work done by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She speaks of 5 phases that people go through, where there is denial, there is then anger, there can be depression, there can be bargaining, and finally acceptance. right? She of course designed this work through a lot of work on dying. This is not the same thing, but we've seen whenever something important is taken away from us, that is the spiral we have. So the denial of the problem, or the denial saying, I don't even want to look at it, but remembering that denial here is actually the organism taking space to make space for the loss to actually land. Now people are not going to go through all these feelings the same way. Numbing will be there, anger will be there. Why me? So many of us will have a crisis of meaning when something like this happens to us, and the question will be agonizing that there is no answer to why you. And so you find people wanting to tell their story, and that's exactly what she's talking about here when she says that when someone's telling you their story over and over, they are trying to figure something out. So what someone who's lost something is trying to say is, see what has happened to me. Just see how things went from there to here. I can't make sense of it. And to accompany or witness them through that point. Her work has, of course, been enriched hugely by the work of David Kessler. You can find podcasts by him. He came to the podcast series with Brené Brown, where he spoke about meaning last year. And also, again, the things he says about meaning are very human. So he says each person's grief is as unique as their fingerprint, just like our regrets. Our grief is very, very unique. But what everybody has in common is how they grieve. Everybody needs their grief to be witnessed. They don't need someone trying to lessen or reframe it. And they need someone to be present to the full magnitude of their loss without pointing out silver linings. Now, while it's all very well to say this, one is we are not all assured this kind of learning and listening. We are also not all grieving the same. So different losses will give rise to different patterns, different people, different genders grieve differently. There's a lot of research on how for men to grieve like this, they actually have to rebel against their social roles. This is not what you expect of men. So it's additional pressure on men. Similarly, if you take this and you contextualize this in loss of somebody through suicide, no one is going to want to talk. There may be a lot of stigma. There may be a lot of psychological skeletons left behind in the survivor's heart and mind, and it may not be easy. Similarly, you place this in another context where it's a difficult relationship. Again, there are going to be different patterns which are going to show up. So loss alone is not the thing. The context in which it has happened, how much support we have. For instance, today, if you had a very, very close friend who could listen to you today, because of the lockdown, they may not be accessible. So multiple sort of ways in which this grief experience has become more and more complex, and help has become lesser and lesser accessible in the current times that we are at. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, how do you even define grief? It's something that you define by absence. Nobody knows what course it will take. Nobody wholly examines or understands what you've lost, but yes, it is defined by an absence. There can be any range of responses apart from the ones we spoke about. There can be a lot of guilt. There can be a lot of anxiety. So a loss makes you very susceptible to doubting all other parts of your life. So if I do very badly in an interview and I lose a job, I may start doubting what I'm going to do ahead in entirety. There are also, like I said, various different ways in which people grieve. Some people could be very instrumental, which is that person who's going to say, this has been difficult, I'm just going to take like a whole week off and take care of myself, do what I need to, etc., etc. These are intuitive grievers. They have a sense of what their system is asking for, and they want to give themselves that. But there can also be a lot of people who are going to just throw themselves into work, throw themselves into anything that takes them away from that experience. They're being instrumental about their grieving. This happens at all points over and over again. Like I said, this will also differ based on gender, age, and who you've lost or what you've lost. Another hopeful thing, of course, is that our systems will heal from grief. It's just like how we have a scab when we have a cut. Our bodies are and our minds are they will make space for grief, provided we have the kind of support and the kind of space that is needed. Some things that can really, really help somebody is being able to proactively take support. So if I sort of figure that tomorrow is a big day, tomorrow is 1 month since I lost out on something, I can't wait around anymore today to say, maybe somebody will call, because yes, people do move on and grief can be very isolating. So it is important to proactively give somebody a call and say, you know what, tomorrow is going to be a little tough. Can we get onto a Zoom call, or can I try and meet you, or will you just be there for me? As with everything, social support is one of those things where the perception that I have it is a lot more helpful than you actually sometimes having to even go and need it. There are studies which will tell you that in cancer care, being married or being in a partnered relationship which is long term and supportive is as protective as chemotherapy itself. So this is a unique interaction that we have of our mind and the body meeting, and grief and its effects on the immune systems actually show exactly how this is. So when you're alone, you will heal with a longer timeline. Can we move to the next slide? Right. Now, tasks of mourning is something we learn from the work of Wisdom. Wisdom and Worden have a book where they talk about how when we are grieving, we need to go through 4 different phases. And we can find ourselves again switching between to loss and restoration again. But the first is to really accept the reality of a loss. This is why people attend funerals. This is why we return things that belong to a former partner. This is why we stop going to work. If we lost a job there, we may not go to work that way because you really want to cut that part and tell yourself that that door has closed. Okay, this can be hard. This is usually the first step, of course, for everybody. Some people will take longer. The minute the loss hits, then we'll have a lot of difficult emotions, all the emotions we spoke about in vast intensity, because that's when the pain is going to really hit. Up until the time we haven't accepted the reality, denial mode is on. It's supporting you to make space. But when there is an experience of loss, this is when we need most support and space to speak. This is also when a lot of people are actually coming to therapy because they're realizing that they are not feeling like themselves. People will come to therapy and say, I think I'm going crazy. I've never been like this. This is not me. My family is worried about me. My cardiologist told me that it's not just this, you need to go talk to a therapist. So we have now people who are 60 years old and they're coming back to therapy saying, I don't know what's happening with me. It's destabilizing to say the least. Person I'm meeting, actually, she said that if I ask her to embody the loss she had, she said it's like something was just torn out of here and taken away. So that is the rawness of emotions that we'll go through at this point of time. Slowly, of course, people will start to adjust. They may start to watch the news, they may start replying to emails, they may slowly go back to work, they may slowly start to hope for small changes. They may also have an inventory taking, which is they start thinking of, okay, now I've lost this opportunity, what am I going to do, what should I be doing, where should I be going. So that whole bit is again the restoration, and slowly people will move into trying to get into a newer space. This is happening in all losses, and it's fundamental to be able to see that we are going through all these stages whenever it is possible, which means that if I don't have support from one person, I need to activate or get some support. It may feel like for the griever that, oh my God, even this is something I need to do. But there is some wisdom to why this experience is coming our way. And if we give it the resources it needs, it's going to sort of integrate better. Next slide, please. Right. So what are the ways then, this whole talk of embodying it and expressing it, etc.? I know that there will be this question of what does it mean to do all of this? Essentially, it means to make sense of it here, to give expression or embodiment to it, and of course, to deal with the feelings that will come up in the system. I really think this has a huge component of the body in it, because when you're grieving, your body will feel heavier. So giving your body what it needs first is the sort of step to do. But coming to 3 major approaches, grief needs you to see that this happened and there may be another way of looking at it. For instance, Yalom is a very, very famous existential therapist who would actually ask, there are videos where you can see he's talking to a very, very old man who's lost his spouse, and he tells her that, so he's devastated, he's lost his spouse of many years, and he tells her that, would you have, what would have been better had she lived on and you had gone? And he says, no, that would have been terrible, because I would have been, I'm the one who took care of her, and she won't have been able to manage without me. And slowly through the conversation, Yalom brings this person to a point where he says, yeah, grief is the price of love. So if you think of a pet, if you think of a, like a part of your life which is very, very precious, you wouldn't have stopped it from becoming precious because you knew the grief was coming. And humanistic approaches believe that, this is what love is accompanied by loss. loss is nothing but love turned the other way around, and so they make space for it like that. The second thing is narrative approaches, which look at this as a meaning making process. So for instance, if I ask you to just answer 3 questions in terms of who was I in February of last year before the pandemic hit, who was I in the first few months of the pandemic, and how have I changed now, automatically your mind will start to approach this as a narrative where there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you want to even just take a minute and do that, what comes to mind? Who were you before all of this happened, when you were, just going on that river of life and things were fine, and how has that changed from then to now? Anybody? Any shifts that you notice, perspective wise, action, the way you choose to live? Right. Abhishek says he's more aware of his moods and feelings. Anybody else? Hopeful, numb, hopeless. Yes, I think the pattern of the lockdown is 2 good days followed by 1 terrible day, and then again 2 good days followed by 1 terrible day. From loss of purpose to something worth looking for. Yeah. Right. Shashank, thank you for sharing that. Lavanya says, in the beginning, highly enthusiastic and chasing behind success. In the middle, acceptance of a certain reality, and now acceptance. Yes. I think last year was a honeymoon compared to what happened this year. Now I remember everybody at that point making dalgona coffee and art and craft, and it was really about using up your time. And then this year, shit got real. Yes. Thank you to everybody who responded there. Yes, so this is not even something that's a technique. It's just that our brains are wired to constantly make meaning. That's who we are as human beings. And we are constantly trying to impose some meaning onto what's happening. And because it allows us to see ourselves as a story that, I have continued from there and I will continue. And this is just a knot and it's happened. And generally, when we work with narrative approaches, it's very, very versatile, collaborative. I may actually share an activity with a client and then they will tell me how they felt and how it's changed. It's 2 human beings connecting over an experience which one person has and another person is trying to share. It's beautiful. The last is mindfulness and somatic approaches with generally trying to bring in an element of expression, because we think through our grief so much. It's very important to, before the mind kicks in and filters everything, what is the raw experience of that loss. So once when someone is saying that there's a huge self-confidence and now because of the loss that's changed completely, even when you're uttering those words, there will be a certain feeling, maybe in the body, it may be a heaviness, it may be a tug, it may be anything, but those feelings hold a lot of clues as to how our mind is reading that emotion. And generally, when you work to give sort of expression to that, whether it is through movement, so if you have a practice where you move your body in a certain way, whether it's art, whether it's play, drama, whatever it may be, it allows you to sort of something, when you feel it long enough, it will integrate. That's the only problem with experiential avoidance and doing things to distract, because distraction stops us from allowing that to seep into our system. So I'll have examples of all of these because I wanted some sort of takeaways for everyone. And we'll just look at that. Deep, can you move ahead? So on top, these are narrative and journaling type of experience sort of techniques. So the first one speaks of a person. It doesn't have to always be a person. It can be anything. But what impact has that person, someone you lost in any sense, relationship or otherwise? What impact did they have on any part of me? This is just a sample. But you can look at what values did you learn from them? What are your favorite memories with them? Or if it was a workplace or a specific goal you had, what was it that had you so kicked about it? Normally, we feel like when something doesn't happen, we need to keep that door closed, which is why people will say, I've not gone to that room, I don't go that way. It's because we feel like if we avoid it, then we won't feel the bad things. But sometimes it's only when you feel the bad things and move through that your system will suddenly feel expansion. What is expansion or containment? Imagine if you were a regular small swimming pool, and it's full of all sorts of balls in there. These balls are big parts of your life: work, relationship, family, home, finances, whatever. Normally, the way we cope, we want to imagine that somebody will take this ball and remove it, and so we'll have more space. But actually, if you process these experiences by engaging with them, by talking about them, by allowing yourself to feel the feelings a little bit, then sometimes you will feel like the pool has expanded. The balls are still there in the pool, but you have more space for these feelings because you're not sort of bypassing them. Another thing that some people do, and this is not just now, this has been there from poets and for centuries, people have been writing about their grief. So sometimes what you cannot say in words will come out better in a 4-line poem. And it sort of becomes not just your experience, but a universal experience. So many people will feel like, what, I've had that feeling. So if you look at any form of journaling, so sometimes you're asked to do like 15 minutes, just sit and write, not to censor yourself, but just to write how you have been feeling. When you also do something like this over a continued period of time, you become aware of what you're missing, and then you can move towards seeking it, getting it, sort of, creating ways or manifesting a plan over there. Because very often we're just on autopilot the whole time. Life has become such, work has become such, it's literally just enough to get by your day, which is get out of bed, log into the system, be on that system, get a meal, watch some TV and get into bed. So we're losing touch with what we are actually missing out as well in that sense. And a regular practice of connecting with your feelings, whether it's writing or whether you're just sitting with yourself, sometimes helps do that. Usually for journaling, we of course recommend not doing it and then hitting off to bed or something, to have a transitional activity. Some other things that can be done. Deep, can you move ahead? So these are uses with art. So based on what you like, I know it may be like a long time since a lot of us have touched art supplies, but this is not art for the sake of the product. You don't have to paint the Mona Lisa. It's really about art as a process. So on the right, you see this is actually from a paper by Robert Niemeyer, where he talks about meaning reconstruction and how people can use various modalities and activities. So here they basically try to patch together all the feelings and the colors they associate with those feelings as they're grieving. So you can see there are large parts of gray, black, blue or purple, which feel like loss, the colors of loss or anger or sadness. But there's also a blob of pink and a blob of yellow, which again points towards restoration. Similarly, if you see the piece on the left, I mean, the narrative could be that, my life from the loss, there is actually a loss, and my life is growing like fresh tendrils, but all the petals are not the same color. So blue may mean a different color, or green may mean a different color. So possibilities exist, but my loss exists too. I think this is seen the best in the next slide. Deep, can you just move ahead? In the use of metaphors, a lot of people find it difficult to articulate loss. We may feel like, I don't know what I'm feeling, why is this happening to me? And they may want, like I said at the swimming pool, you want the ball to go away, you want the pain part of your life to shrink. So literally on the left, if you see the metaphor of the grief jar, we want the ball to shrink and shrink further, so we don't have to feel it as much. From the first session that someone comes in to talk about grief, they'll be like, I want to know what structure we can have and when I'm going to feel better. But actually, it's about sharing. There are 3 T's here: talking, time, and transition. So the more we allow ourselves this space, we start to feel that expansion. So the loss, if you see, stays the same size, but we sort of grow around it. The burning matchstick is also an interesting metaphor. It's also from a paper on languishing and talks about how we've been, at one point we were just completely pre-pandemic, and then how the pandemic and the losses and the heaviness has slowly just consumed all of us and everything. Uh, we have 10 minutes more, right, Deep?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll just move ahead then. We can skip the next slide, we can go further. Right. So essentially on the left are things we need to deal with loss, which is connection, relaxation. Relaxation means anything which brings your body out of an active I'm doing mode into a relaxed mode. There is also desensitization. So when you remember the second wave was at its peak, even if something was not happening to you, watching the news, watching the coverage would have definitely got you activated. Similarly, when you hear something very difficult has happened, in a hostel next to you or in the campus, you cannot cut away from it. And it actually is not just, it's happened to someone else. That same arousal will be happening in your system in a small way. So to move away from that and soothe ourselves, which would give rise to a feeling of restoration. And what we, of course, need is the space and scope to tell a story, which is why listening spaces are burgeoning. Support groups are now all over the place because suddenly everybody has a story which needs someone listening, right? So telling our story, telling it as it is, not feeling the need to clean up the bad parts and say, no, 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 I'm making through it, because literally now no one is feeling that way. And another very important part, to experience parts of our life that have stayed the same, which is, maybe I'm still able to get up and go for a walk. That is something I used to like to do. Maybe I can still, in fact, I think you guys have one of the most beautiful campuses, and that space is still there. Are we really able to step out and enjoy it? We may not be doing it because we sort of just given up at this point, and it's just like I said, bed to laptop, back to bed. So making a deliberate effort to bring these parts of life, which have actually, you can still call a friend and talk to them, you can still step out to do something you like, you can still read a book, but we have to actively bring those into what I call a refuge, or a refuge space, or a plan, because now we really need to operationalize all of this information into a plan that we need. It's also called a resilience plan sometimes. But what have we got in the pandemic? We got a lot of isolation at a time when we most needed the connection. People who would normally be support systems, like literally, if someone who has a therapist reaches out to their therapist could be dealing with something and is not available. This can be very hard for the person who's sort of the case that we saw the snippet in the beginning, where the therapist is literally the only one person who knows what's happening with her. Again, because our grief is not visible to others, people don't know sometimes that we are grieving. When someone comes to a department or a workplace not looking okay, all of us clamor and we let them, what happened, or you come stay with me, or I'll come stay with you. Now people have gotten isolated so much with that loss, and of course there is a loss of rituals and there is loss of control, both of which are almost traumatic for all of us. Next slide. Now, what can you do for yourself? The first thing is to get connections. Connections are essential. We'll look at a small video a little bit later if we have time, which actually tells you how much our body needs to be in connection with people. It needs to feel safe, and for that it needs connection. We also need to find continued connections with what we have lost, which could mean that if an opportunity has been lost, finding a way to talk about it, finding a way to create space for that in your own life. So some people will keep actually transitional objects from a breakup or from a death, where they say, this person's spectacles I want to keep with me. It's a way of continuing connection to the loss, not cutting it out of your life. It may mean that you go to visit a place you used to go before the pandemic and just see how it feels when you're actually present in that place, and your body and that place are feeling aligned. A huge thing is to not compare our grief. So I loved when people actually came out and they stated saying, I'm feeling like this, I'm feeling like this, because we are in a society where even in grief there is competition. So we may feel like, oh, that person is dealing with this so much better, and therefore something is wrong with me that I am struggling so much. Grief is very, very personal, and it will take the time and the course that it wants to take. And to treat yourself like your best friend on the days that you're faltering. So you may have planned that you're going to do, like, 4 hours of writing each day, and this is how it's going to be, and then you fail one day, and then we are just telling ourselves the world's worst things, saying, it's never going to happen, it's always me. But if a friend was doing that, you would say, no, I think you just need to try another day, you take today off. Compassion for others is so much easier for us than to find compassion for ourselves. So not to compare your grief, to not scapegoat yourself too much for your failures, and to really count your wins. So I know someone who said that, they're just not motivated anymore. Now, it's also because we have a pre-pandemic idea of productivity where we still put in 8 hours of work, and then there is home and there's all these other things. It really needs a drastic revision, which means at base we have food, we have work, and we have movement and rest. These are the only things we need to be able to do to some percentage. It's like our bandwidth has gone from 100 to 50, but we are expecting ourselves to work at a full 100, right? It's really because it's physically impossible at this point. Next slide. When you're talking to somebody about loss, like we said, ask them how they're doing. Don't tell them, oh, this happened to you, I dealt with it like this, maybe you should try this too, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that, that helped somebody I know, I will send you a link to it. Don't. People will find their way in whatever sort of sense. Just see what happens when you are just like a companion to them. Ask questions from spirit, from concern, not from intellect. So this happens a lot because we approach a lot of emotional conversations with a fixed mindset where we are like, oh, is this because of that happened at that point? It's not helping the person. The person just wants a companion. Again, not asking questions out of expertise, I know better, I am leading the way here, but just to be alongside to them, to not bypass their pain by saying there are brighter things to happen, good things are going to just be around the corner. You may mean really well. No one says these things out of deliberate intention, which is bad, but it ends up feeling like, for the person who's grieving, who's already overwhelmed, they may feel like, even with this person I don't have the space to know that this is going to be a chaotic journey, loss restoration constantly, and to respect silence. Sometimes the grieving person does not want to talk at all, but you can still tell them that, I know you're not feeling too good, I don't know what to tell you, but it's important to me that you have support, and I'm there just a call away, I'll come by if you need it. uh, so these are some of the things. Can you play this video on your end, Deep?
Yeah, I'm doing just that. Just a second.
Yeah.
Are you able to see the YouTube window?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Um, I don't know if everyone could make sense of it. So essentially, it shows this impala being attacked, and so automatically it fakes its own death, right? So it sort of flops its head. Now, just to remember that whatever's happening in that animal's biology is also sort of the way we also deal with stress, just that it may not be as evident. Then you see the impala sort of really sort of catches itself in a freeze mode and it's trying to basically survive. And it's only when the threat has passed that it takes out and it sort of really takes this huge breath. And then when you see it slowly sort of come out of that freeze mode, it tries to shake itself and then it really runs. It's because when all organisms are trying to cope with something which feels like a stress like that, we summon an enormous amount of energy and capacity to fight. But when we can't fight and when we can't flee and we're stuck in a freeze mode, all of that energy that had been sort of galvanized for that action is sort of in our system. And so literally when the animal is shaking, it's getting rid of that energy which has no place to go. But because we have become so sedentary and so sort of frozen in our lifestyles, we are sitting with the same kind of energy which has nowhere to go. This is actually hugely implicated in chronic health issues, in the freeze mode, in the languishing that we're feeling now. So just to move to the next slide, Lee. So I'm not going to go too much into this because this will anyway be covered. But what happens is within this red range is what happens to our system when we are trying to cope with something and we have the scope, which is that, there is an option to fight, the energy will get used, or I will run. So the energy will get used again. But when this stressor continues, so this line, we would have been in the red belt maybe in the first few months of the pandemic, but this has gone from the gray line which says I can to I can't, and we are actually probably, a lot of us are in potentially freeze like stages. What we need to do is essentially what you see that animal do. We need to really take care of our systems, which is moving, breath, generally trying to be present. Right now in the pandemic, a lot of us are projecting ourselves into the future and saying, what's it going to be like? Where am I going to be? I've been set back by 2 years. Business has been set back by 5 years. But all of the things that you reported feeling, numbness, helplessness, feelings of trapped, feeling, like your immune system is just slowed down, are actually happening in the blue zone. If you just take a look at the green zone, which is called the social engagement system in polyvagal theory, it basically is the space where I am present in the moment, I have connections, and I am feeling safe, right? This is all you need in a certain sense to allow your system to get that energy out of your system. Ways to do this are deep connections with people, any movement practice, yoga, yin yoga, anything you do which allows that frozen energy, the energy of the freeze state, to go through your system. Now, we've heard a lot of stuff, and I want to just go to the next slide, which is the last, to ask you to think about if you had to create your own ritual for the day, or a resilience plan, or a refuge space, as I call it. What can be, things that you would want to add, just to mindfully think of anything that may seem important. Reiterating again that the basics, of course, are nutrition, eating when you need to eat, eating what you need to eat, rest, not powering through, giving your system the rest that it deserves. Not as, I have to do it, so I'm going to sleep now, but to really tell yourself that my work day is over, my fun day is over, and now it's time for me to rest, and some sort of a movement practice to let it through. Very important to talk about rituals. Esther Perel is constantly talking about rituals. It's because rituals help bring some certainty, telling yourself that, okay, this is when I'll be doing this. I have access to this experience, which I do at the same time every day. It tells your brain that there is safety and predictability within this house, even if it's not there outside. I have recently been talking to a lot of people about second best rituals, which is, yes, you're not going to have the scope to go visit a friend, meet somebody for their wedding, be with a family member. What is the second best thing you can do? Someone didn't get to graduate in a convocation ceremony. What is the way they can, put a signpost there saying something important happened to me here, and I want to remember and honor that day or that time. So what are these second best rituals if you can't do the thing that you intended to do? Another way of looking at it is How do you fulfill in fantasy what you couldn't in reality? So really allowing people to speak about, yes, you didn't get to do that. What did you imagine that day would be like? It's not a sad thing to talk about as much as it is, you know, because again, we don't want to lock that need or the want we had. We want some expression of that. So when a child says, I wanted to go to Disneyland, or I wanted to go to annual day, and now annual day is not happening, we don't want them to shut down and clam up into thinking that it's something they shouldn't talk about, because that is the beginning of distress. Instead, we want to ask them, what did you imagine it would be like? And for us, our intentions, hopes, goals are also just like a child's want. So allowing ourselves to inhabit that space and feel fully what it is that you wanted to do, what did you imagine it would be like, and therefore the pain of what happens when you don't get it, to actively identify a circle of support, people who are going to be around you, reaching out to them and saying, this is the support I need. If we don't have this support in our immediate surrounding, there are ways of getting support, whether it's a listening space, whether it is a therapist, whether it is a campus group. But this is the time for people to really have connections if they have to cope through this phase. And like I said in the beginning, noticing and naming how you're feeling, embodying it through a movement, expressing it in writing, in art, in conversations with people, and therefore making some space for it to integrate. So this is what I have for today. I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Wonderful talk. We have a few questions through the Google form. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So I'll just start with a few questions. Meanwhile, people can type in the chat box if need be.
Yeah.
Okay. First question is, how does one identify what kind of loss one is feeling? This constant feeling of drowning for no reason, even when walking back home from the lab, is kind of infuriating.
Right. The fact that they're using the word infuriating makes me feel like they're angry. It matters, sometimes we're trying to understand through what's just happened before this day, but it could also be like accumulation of stuff. So it doesn't matter how much it is, what type of loss it is, as much as the fact that I'm feeling this loss. Another way to understand it is, what is that thing that's really important to me that's been taken away? It could be freedom, it could be possibility, it could be something. So what is that important thing that they were seeking? It could even be normalcy that's been taken away. Different days we feel different things, right? So to identify what's gone and what am I feeling at this point.
Okay, we have another question. I have lost my father recently due to COVID-19.
Right.
It is really just it is just really difficult to accept. Most of the times I'm in denial, but sometimes it hits me hard. I lose control of my life. I simply don't know how to deal with it. People say it gets easier with time. It is becoming heavier with every passing day. I have no clue what to do. Does it get easier ever? It's especially difficult in the campus where I don't have many friends. I really can't open up to others easily.
I just want to say thank you to the person who shared that and saying that, it is as hard as they're feeling. But with time, maybe with being able to speak or feel the loss, as well as allowing them to remember the person, it may feel very hard. But even if you were to just imagine, how did your father hold you? Like if they were standing here at this point, would they hold you? Would they pat you on your head? And allowing yourself to remember that for some time, but grounding yourself, allowing exposure to the loss and grounding yourself may be one thing, but this is a lot of work to be done on your own. So, if the campus has a center, the center may have a therapist to really find space to talk about it. No one should have to deal with this solo.
Yeah, I do urge that we do have mental health professionals, so please get in touch with them.
Yes, absolutely.
So the next question. So who does one go to in times of grief? There are times when I would like nothing more than to talk to someone, but it hurts to even go to the trouble of seeing someone else with what seems like petty and silly inconveniences in my life. I wish I were a hostel cat who could get free pets for just existing.
Right. Again, that sounds like a lot of sadness, right? And nothing that you're feeling probably is petty. We want to honor repeatedly what is the subjective experience that you have. So it can be something small for you, but the first thing is please, please, please don't compare your grief to somebody else's. A lot of times, like the same client who was mentioned there, the people will say, I have no reason to feel sad. Things are great for me. But you're just doing, when we said, when you want to reach to somebody who's sad and say, it's okay to feel sad, you're doing that for the other person, but you're not doing that for yourself. So getting help, writing about it, whatever you can do to embody that emotion, because it is a heavy emotion. It will be worse at some points of day. It will be worse when you meet some people or otherwise. Just notice what's happening with it, track it, name it, notice it, and get space for it.
We have one more question. It's understandable that there is no answer for why me, and my rational self does keep telling me this, but why does it still hurt, no matter how much I rationalize?
It's because it's the mind. So what we're talking about here is rationalizing, which is located in the prefrontal cortex, right? But longing, connection, fear, so much of grief or loss will give rise to fear, which is rooted in the amygdala, and it can be on a constant on sometimes and times like this. So even your body is actually not seeing it that way. You can't impose the lid of the thinking mind on so much feeling in the body and keep that energy trapped inside. It's not going to make sense that way. Even if you try to sort of bypass it, some days it will make sense, but there can be a day when you're not doing too well, and that arousal will show up. So it's not about whether it will get easier with time or not, but what am I going to do to make space for it. Usually we are supported by a lot of people. In fact, if you look at the time when there is a loss at our families, when someone dies, for 14 days people come and they stay, right? That's because we need that sort of support. So right now we don't have that, so we need to reach out and find people wherever possible, support groups, whatever it is, because everything is a little easier when someone's listening. Imagine your loss or your arousal as a balloon. When someone's listening, it's going to get a little deflated and feel more manageable. It may not go away, but it will feel more manageable.
Next question. Could rejection of any kind make one feel grief? Don't know why, but being rejected in social situations, even the small and insignificant ones, often feel like being punched in the ribs.
Absolutely, right? Because we have a fundamental belief that we are worthy, and when we are worthy, then people should recognize that worth is what we want. But there are times when you hit a roadblock, you hit a wall, you're trying something, it's not happening, if there's no other way to go, there will be immense frustration, and you will label it in what appears to you subjectively, which for you of course is rejection related grief or loss or anguish. It's valid, absolutely valid.
Is it a good idea to just shut out the strange and annoying feeling by diving into work? When I'm not working, the loneliness creeps in and it isn't something I know how to deal with.
Right. The very fact that it's helping to work, yeah, maybe that's a good thing to do. But in the short range, if you have to enjoy your free time can't feel like I'm dreading to go into my free time because I know these thoughts will come back up. So then, in even your free time, this person's probably is not able to unwind or restore or relax. So the time of work is also not really sort of relieving in a certain sense. Actively doing something you like, if there is anything that you enjoyed doing at one point and you stop, the body needs to know that there is scope for safety even in the present, scope for joy, even if it's a very small one, but in the present, the emotion will shift. When we are doing the same thing and we're expecting to feel something different, chances are that will be harder unless something external comes and influences us. So it's important to give yourself the space for that arousal to either move through, or you do something, or you connect with somebody, whatever it is that's possible, to try just one new change for a few days and see how it helps or not.
How can we separate ourselves ourselves from old memories of our past relationships, which hurt us in present, especially when those memories are attached with our ways of getting refreshment or activity that makes us happy.
Right.
But just when I do it, I get carried away in the past memories and things get miserably sad and bad.
Right. It's exactly what happens when you've lost that relationship, right? Um, so you can't get away. Does it feel like, you enter that space and tell yourself that I will come out of here? So for people who are just out of a loss, sometimes I tell them to create a space, in literally like a physical space in the house, where they'll go for 15 minutes and sit, and if they want to write or they want to cry or whatever it is, to do that in that space and say, for today I've attended to this painful part and now I'm going to move to this other stuff. Because you also can't take that experience away. That experiences, of course, fundamentally, shape this person somehow. That person was important. The experiences they had with them was important. So you can't just cut that connection like that. Slowly, maybe the need to visit that space may become less frequent.
How to deal with sympathy in grief?
Yeah, there's a lot of sympathy that comes that way. Maybe to politely tell them that, you get that they care, but that's not helping. Would they just like to be present with you? Would they just like to spend some time with you and then listen to you or do something entirely different? You don't have to need people only to witness your pain, right? Someone to play like a game of badminton with or go for a walk with without talking about the grief is also giving you companionship. It's also giving you distraction. But if the sympathy is irking you, it really irks me when people say these things and it just isn't what I need, it's not sitting well. Maybe to tell them that I really appreciate you trying to say this, I know you mean well, but that's not how I see it, and I don't want to hear that. But I'm still appreciative of your company.
When a friend approaches you that they are grieving due to a certain situation, but at the same time are in denial about the effects of it, what should one do as a friend?
What should the friend do if this person is denying it?
Yes.
Right. Uh, if that person is denying it, at least in the beginning, I would honor it because I think maybe, they are still in the process of making space. The very fact that they have a person who's concerned and is showing up for them tells me that if that person decides to move from denial into the messy parts of the grieving process, I think they will still be there. So, literally, your presence is probably the single most important thing, and you're already providing that. So, yeah, that's precious.
Okay. Yeah, we have a few more if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all.
Okay. I lost my father a few months back, struggling throughout COVID-19 pandemic for hospitalization with his illness. But I had lost my mother when I was 3, so it took a lot of time to come out of it. Then this sudden loss was a big shock. I'm in the middle of a PhD here and I feel completely stuck in life, not moving anywhere, not finding happiness in anything. Now I'm losing focus in research. It also gets triggered bad with when listening to other near losses. How to manage this being in a hostel and go forward with my research?
Right. This person needs so much. Like, I'm feeling like there's so much happening, right? I mean, where are they getting, like, if they were a bank, imagine how much capacity has been taken in coping with that first loss, which is so integral, and then this. And I'm not sure what is being put into them to really restore and expect to function normally. So, definitely, this person may need time off, this person may need more care, they may need to be in therapy, they may need, even if not therapy, to have spaces where they can go and really show up as they are. It's also so it's isolating, this sort of a loss. I mean, I don't know how someone can just function as they previously did. It's really too much. It seems like a harsh expectation for some time.
And we would ask this person, like we do have some mental health professionals, so please do get in touch with them and
Yes.
try to seek for some therapy if possible.
Right.
So we have one more question, which is somewhat similar to one of the questions we talked about earlier. What if it feels to be like to be alone and not talk to anyone at all. It feels like everything is just useless. How to deal with this?
Uh, you, I mean, human beings can't function like that. I mean, yeah, I know we live in a time where there's a lot of I, and it feels like the narrative all over social media will make you feel like, whatever you decide, you can be doing on your own, you will do on your own. But that narrative of this individual overcoming all is very, very weighty. Just when you think of it, your system starts to feel like it's exhausting, it's relentless. We don't have to live like that, and we can't be our best selves like that either in the long run. So please find ways that you, whatever is a safe way of connecting. I'm not asking this person to really go in, like, how much ever social connection you can take, go share a cup of tea with somebody and see how it feels. Tomorrow you can do that again, right? But we really have to be connected in a time which is as isolating as this.
Okay, so just one last question. Recently, I had to stop talking to somebody who was close to me because I was not able to manage the emotions and the dynamics that came with it. How would you manage this grief when you have to face this person in daily life?
Right. So this is a living loss, right? Every time you see this person, it's a reminder. Um, Depending on the history of this relationship, like whatever happened, is it okay to? I mean, there is definitely a rationale why someone has taken this step. So if this other person feels like interacting with them is deliberately harmful, then when you are not connecting with them, reminding yourself of why, what happens when you go too close, and the same things will happen again, right? So actually this person is setting a boundary, and sometimes when we set a boundary, we have to risk that disapproval, risk that disengagement or loss, and that's what's happened here. To remind yourself why you did it. Does it feel like at some point you guys can reorganize your respective positions, and meet in a way which is healthy and balanced for both of you? If not, then to really remember why you did it, and to sort of keep that as an incentive for why you're having to go through this painful process. Boundary setting isn't the easiest.
Okay, so I think with that, we end the first half of the workshop. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Dr. Shoma, for this wonderful
Yeah.
talk and answering all these questions so patiently.
Thank you.
A quick word on the schedule. We do have one more talk, which is about trauma by Ms. Ashwini NV. However, I think we will take a 10-minute break before we resume. So, yeah, we'll see each other at 4 or 5 after 10 minutes. Okay.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thank you.